Everyone. In this tutorial, let's write a C++ program that asks the user to enter a number of rows and then prints the equilateral triangle with these many rows. So for example, if the user enter 5, it should print this shape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. Why I started from this screen before Visual Studio, this type of problem requires some mathematical thinking before we can actually jump into writing the code. So let's look at it. Let's start with number of rows equal 3. So let's say the user will enter number of 3. Because once you set up your loops for any minimal number, you can write it for million rows. So let's see what this one will require. So for 3 rows, the expected shape that we want to print out is as follows. So notice the spaces. So in between the stars here, we have a space. I'm gonna just like write S, 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 and S. And then in the first row, so we need space, space here for this star, space here, and a space here. For this second row, we need 2 spaces. And then for the third row, we don't have any spaces before the stars. So in order to write this program, we're going to use couple for loops. So first, what is a for loop for people who are not familiar with it? So a for loop, it has the initialization here, followed by a condition, and then semicolon, and then here we have increment or decrement, depending on our logic. So we're going to start with one for loop here for the number of rows. So we're going to declare an integer I equals 0 or I equal 1. So we start from row 1. And then the condition will be as long as I is less than or equal than the number of rows, I plus plus. So we cover every single row. And then inside this one, this is what nested loops are. And then inside this for loop, we're going to need 2 other for loops. So one for the spaces before the stars. So let's write this for loop. So we're going to declare, let's call it j equal 1. And then here for this condition, this is what requires some mathematical thinking. So let's see. So let's write here a column for rows of I coming from this for loop. And then here in this other column, let's write spaces. So on the first row, as we can see here, we need 4 spaces before this star. So row of I number 1, we need 4 spaces. In the second row, we need 2 spaces. I wrote 2s. So row I number 2, we need 2 spaces. And then for the last row, number 3, row I number 3, we don't need any spaces, so that's 0 spaces. So now from this, let's find the relation between j, number of rows, and I. So from this row here, so we have spaces equal. So let's see the relation. So we need 4 spaces. So we're going to find the relation between number of rows, which is a 3, and row of I. So if we do 3, which is the number of rows, minus 1, we get 2. So we need to multiply it by 2 in order to get 4. So 3 is the number of rows the user will enter, and number 1 is the I. So let's see if this applies to here. So here the spaces, which is we have 2 in this case. So let's see if we do also the number of rows, which is rows number, it's a 3, minus I is 2, which is I. So 3 minus 2 is 1. If we multiply it by 2, we get 2 spaces. So this is good. So let's see if we can apply here. So spaces is equal rows minus I. So rows is a 3, and I is a 3 in this row. So 3 minus 3 is 0. We can still multiply it by 2 just to kind of generalize the formula. So now we can come up with our condition here. So j, which is for the spaces, is less than or equal than 2 times rows minus I. And then we're going to do j plus plus. And then from here, we're going to see out space. So now let's see the other for loop, this one to print stars. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna print a star followed by space. Because as you notice, we have star, space after it, star, space after it. So the space is very easy. In the cout after the for loop, we can type a star and give it one space, and that's it. But let's see the condition. This is where it also requires some mathematical thinking. So we're gonna need a for loop, int, let's call it k, equal 1, initialize it to 1. Now we need the condition here. I'm gonna leave it a little bit more space, and then we're gonna increment k plus plus. So we're gonna go with a similar idea. So the row of I, and then in this column, we're gonna write stars. We're gonna see how many stars we need in each row. And then we're gonna come up with the relationship. So in row number 1, we need 1 star, as we see here. In row number 2, we need 3 stars. In row number 3, we need 5 stars. So now let's find the relationship for stars as a function of I. So let's see, because this also for loop is inside this for loop. So in the first row, we have 1 star. So we can write stars, which is denoted by k, right, is equal to 1. So we can write it as, if we do 2 times I, which is 1 in this row, minus 1, this will give us 1. Let's see if we can generalize it for the second row. So stars, or k, equal. If we do 2 multiplied by 2 minus 1, we get 3. So we can do 2 times I minus 1, so we get 3, because I in this row is 2. Let's see if it applies here. 2 times 3 is 6 minus 1 equal 5. So that's also 2I minus 1. We get 5. So this will be here, our condition will be as long as k is less than or equal than 2 multiplied by I minus 1 k plus plus. In the first run, when I equal 1, we're going to initialize k equal 1. Is 1 less than 2I minus 1, which is for the first run, I is 1. Is it less than or equal than 1? True. Then we're going to cout a star followed by space, 1 space, because we have space after each star. And we're going to increment k. So k will become 2. Is 2 less than or equal than 1? No. Then this will break this loop and go back to this loop. And then for the second run, we will print 3 stars. Each one is followed by space. And then for the last run, we're going to print 5 stars. Each one is followed by space. So now let's move to Visual Studio C++ to write this code and see what we get. Okay, so now moving to Visual Studio to write the code and execute it. So let's call it I'm saving it in my download area in CPP. So I'm going to call it 3 underscore, call it 3 underscore equilateral triangle. This created a new project, and then, as we mentioned, right click on the source file, add a new item, CPP file. Let's call it main. Click enter for add. Let me zoom in a little bit. So we need the input output library IO stream. We zoom in a little bit more. And then using namespace std. So we don't have to write std : every time before the cout, cin, and so forth. And we're gonna write our code into the main function. So open curly bracket, close curly bracket, and then at the end we're gonna need return 0 if the code executes without any errors. So now let's start writing our code. So the problem was to prompt the user to enter the number of rows. So first let's define an integer and let's call it rows. So this is what the user will enter. And then to ask the user to enter the number of rows, we're going to use a cout. We're going to tell the user enter number of rows, colon, space, semicolon at the end. And in order to store this number in rows, we're going to use a cin rows. So wherever the user enters, if he enters 5, 5 will get stored in rows. If we enter 3, 3 will get stored in rows and so forth. So now we're going to start our loops, for loops, the one we were kind of talking about earlier. So first for the number of rows, so we're going to initialize I equal 1 because we're going to start with row number 1. As long as I is less than or equal the number of rows, we're going to increment I plus plus. Open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And then now we're going to write the for loop inside this for loop for the spaces. So let's initialize j with 1. And then as we mentioned our formula earlier, as long as j is less than or equal than 2 times number of rows minus I, we're going to increment j plus plus. Then what we're going to do inside it, we're going to print a space. To do that, cout, double quotation, space in between them, semicolon at the end. Now we need one more for loop, this one to print the stars. So let's initialize it with k equal 1. And then the relationship was k less than or equal than 2 times I minus 1. And then for new users, star is used for multiplication in C++. And then we're gonna increment k plus plus. K plus plus, it'll increment k by 1 after each iteration. So inside here, what we're gonna print a star followed by space. And then after we print all the stars, we're gonna do end line or a new line. So this curly bracket, if you put the cursor before it, it belongs to this for loop, the first for loop. So right after we're done with the stars with this for loop, we're gonna do a new line. So to do this, cout end line or /n. Let's just like get rid of some spaces here. Okay, so now let's run our code and see if it works as expected. So let's start with the 3 rows. There you go. This is the shape we wanted. So let's try a bigger number. So let's try 5. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe do 20 rows. See what happened. It's working as expected. So this is all for this video. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching.
Enjoyed this video? Subscribe to the Computer Engineering Notebook for more tutorials on computer architecture, embedded systems, and hardware design. And hit the bell to catch the next one.